We often imagine that our ancestors fought beasts to survive. But the shocking truth is, what they feared most was not predators, but the endless winter and the frozen sky. The question is, how did these small, fragile beings, without claws, without fangs, manage to endure a global catastrophe? 1 million years ago, humanity entered the first ice age. Imagine living a million years ago when the Earth was engulfed in ice. Temperatures plummeted, cold winds cut through flesh, forests vanished, and before early humans lay only a fragile existence. The question is, how did our ancestors, these small, weak beings, survive the first ice age? The world before the global chill, about a million years ago, was a very different planet from today. The climate then was warmer. Vast areas were covered in dense forests. Rivers teemed with fish, and endless grasslands sustained countless large animals. This was the world where our distant ancestors, Homo erectus, or upright man, were learning to survive. They had no sturdy homes, no technology, no complex language. They lived in small groups, wandering through the wild, entirely dependent on the benevolence or harshness of the environment. By day, they hunted and gathered. By night, they huddled in darkness, with only a faint firelight, sometimes not even knowing how to keep a fire burning for long. Against predators and immense fear. At that time, the world was a place full of life but also fraught with countless dangers. On the grasslands, giant mammoths, woolly rhinoceroses, wild horses, and massive predators always lurked. Humans were not the dominant species, on the contrary. They were just a small, fragile link in the food chain. But it was in that wild realm that human intelligence began to shine. The first stone tools were sharpened to cut meat, break bones for marrow, or shape wood to craft weapons. Each small step forward, each shared experience, was the thread that bound them to a cruel nature. However, signs of instability began to appear. The sky changed, winters grew longer, and ice and snow began to creep down from the north. Scientists today have found evidence that Earth's climate was entering a global cooling cycle, an event that would change the fate of all humankind. As the forests gradually disappeared, as rivers froze, food became scarce, and the cold winds pierced the flesh, the question arose, what would these small humans do to survive in the world before the global chill? When the first climate changes appeared, our ancestors could not yet understand what was happening. They only felt that harvests were no longer as abundant as before. Migratory animal herds arrived later or disappeared entirely, and winters became harsher than ever. For Homo erectus, a longer winter meant potential death. They could not store food, nor did they have agriculture for cultivation. All food depended on opportunistic hunting and gathering. When plants withered and ripe fruits were gone, when scarce prey left to seek new pastures, these primitive human groups faced perpetual starvation. Yet, what distinguished humans from all other species was their ability to observe and adapt. They began to travel further, crossing new lands in search of sustenance. These journeys marked the first migrations of humankind, not out of a desire for exploration, but out of the instinct for survival. Each move was a life or death gamble. Any group that went in the wrong direction and fell into the endless ice would quickly be wiped out. In that journey, solidarity became a crucial factor. A lone individual could hardly survive, but a group could share tasks. Some hunted, some gathered roots and fruits, some kept the fire. This rudimentary cooperation transformed primitive human groups into a true community. But challenges came not only from nature but also from predators. In the freezing cold, saber-toothed tigers and giant cave bears were as hungry as humans. They became more aggressive, ready to hunt any vulnerable creature. With their slender bodies and crude weapons, humans had to rely on intelligence and tactics to fight back. Archaeological traces show that during this period, Homo erectus stone tool-making skills became more sophisticated, evidence of a fierce survival race. And then, as the climate continued to change, the first glacial periods gradually spread across Europe, Asia, and even Africa. Humans were no longer facing isolated difficulties. They had to prepare themselves to confront a new era, a global ice age. An unprecedented challenge in evolutionary history as the darkness of winter lengthened, and the cold seeped into every corner of the world. Primitive humans faced a harsh truth: the era they knew had ended. Fertile lands gradually turned into barren tundra. Rivers no longer flowed vigorously but froze, covered in thick, impenetrable ice. Animals, their primary food source, either migrated far away or slowly died in the bitter cold. In such circumstances, the existence of Homo erectus was more fragile than ever. Not every group survived this brutal transitional period. Some communities perished in silence simply because they could not find food or were killed by predators. This harsh selection process forced the surviving groups to become smarter and more resilient. Crucially, our ancestors began to recognize a new power, a tool superior to the fangs and sharp claws of wild beasts: collective intelligence. By sharing experiences, creating new tools together, and protecting the fire together, primitive humans took the first steps beyond the fate of a weak species. At this point, their dependence on fire grew stronger. Not only a source of warmth, fire also allowed them to cook food, helping their bodies absorb more energy from animal meat. This meant that the brain, a massive energy-consuming organ, had more fuel to develop. This was a silent but profoundly important evolutionary turning point, laying the foundation for the superior intelligence of humans later on. However, maintaining fire was not easy. Many groups did not yet know how to create fire. They had to guard fragile embers day and night, taken from lightning strikes or leftover charcoal from wildfires. There were nights when strong winds extinguished the fire, and the entire community was plunged into fear, knowing that without fire, they would return to a state of utter vulnerability before nature. In every chilling breath, primitive humans learned a great lesson: to survive, they had to change. There was no other option. And this harsh turning point opened the door for powerful adaptation in the next chapter. When the ice truly engulfed the Earth, when the glaciers descended, the world entered an entirely different era. Giant ice sheets began to expand from the North Pole, covering Europe and Asia, where once there were fertile grasslands. Now lay a desolate, frigid, and barren white expanse. The climate changed so rapidly that many giant animal species could not adapt in time. Some vanished permanently, others were forced to migrate thousands of kilometers to find food. For humans, this was a true life or death test. Food, already scarce, became even harder to find. Scattered groups of Homo erectus faced two choices: either migrate with the animal herds or stay and accept the terrible hunger. Much archaeological evidence suggests that during this period, humans began to move further than ever before. They traversed treacherous mountain ranges, crossed frigid lands they had never set foot on. Each step was a battle, not only with nature but also with themselves. Hunger, thirst, disease, wild animals, and despair all lurked in that landscape. Moments of survival became intense. Imagine a small group of primitive humans, just a few dozen individuals, huddled by a frozen riverbank, sharing tiny scraps of meat torn from an animal carcass that had frozen to death. No longer was there ample life, no longer dense forests full of fruits, only a fragile survival against the bone-chilling cold. More frighteningly, winter seemed endless. With their understanding at the time, they could not comprehend that the Earth was entering an ice age cycle lasting tens of thousands of years. They only felt that it was getting colder and colder, and winters were getting longer and longer. For them, it was not just a natural phenomenon but a threat from the heavens. Yet, it was in that frigid darkness that the human will to survive was forged. Each time they overcame a long winter, each time they found fire after a cold wind, each time they collectively brought down a large animal, they learned something new: to survive, they had to be smarter than wild beasts and rely on each other more than ever before. During the long years of ice, hunger became a dangerous enemy, no less than wild animals. Previously, Homo erectus could rely on wild fruits, roots, and small animals, but now, as harvests disappeared, plants withered, and familiar prey departed, they were forced to find new food sources. However harsh the conditions, archaeological evidence shows that our ancestors began to hunt larger, more dangerous animals, such as mammoths, woolly rhinoceroses, or giant aurochs, to bring down an animal weighing tons. Humans could not rely on brute strength but had to employ strategy. They worked collectively. One group would surround, another would cut off their escape, and another would lie in wait to attack with crude stone spears. Each hunt was a gamble, for even a small mistake could lead to the entire group being trampled under an elephant's foot or becoming prey for other wild animals. But it was these perilous hunts that taught humans a valuable lesson: cooperation was their strongest weapon. No one individual was strong enough to face a mammoth alone, but an entire coordinated community could. This was the genesis of a collective survival strategy, a distinct characteristic that would stay with humankind to this day. Besides hunting, humans also learned to utilize animal carcasses that had died from the cold or were left behind by other predators. They not only ate the meat but also took bones for tools, hides for clothing, and fat for light. Every part of the animal was maximized, nothing was wasted, for they understood that it might be their only source of sustenance for many days. But the cold remained the greatest obsession. One night without fire, the entire group could freeze to death. It was in these circumstances that the ability to maintain and protect fire became a crucial survival skill. Small fires amid the cold wind were not just a place to warm up but also the heart of the community. Where they huddled, shared food, and found the belief that they still existed. Nonetheless, not all survived. Many primitive human groups were wiped out by starvation, disease, or harsh weather, but the remaining groups, those who were more resilient and intelligent, were the ones who would continue the story of evolution. And in the darkness of the Ice Age, humans began to realize that only innovation, creativity, and unity could help them survive. As colossal ice sheets continued to descend from the north, primitive humans not only faced the bitter cold but also an invisible fear. Before their eyes, the familiar world was gradually disappearing. Forests withered, rivers and lakes froze, and the ground hardened. For them, this was not just a climate change but felt like a curse from nature. In this context, adaptation was no longer an option but a necessity. Groups of Homo erectus began to learn to move more strategically, choosing places with water sources not completely frozen, areas where large animals migrated through, or rock shelters sheltered enough from the wind to inhabit. This was the period when the ability to observe and remember the environment became a crucial survival skill. More interestingly, many researchers believe that during the Ice Age itself, rudimentary language may have formed. When coordinating hunts in a harsh environment, humans needed a faster way to communicate than isolated cries. Gradually, sounds with specific meanings emerged, perhaps as alarm signals, calls to each other during a hunt, or signs for sharing food. Although not yet a complete language, it was the beginning of complex communication, which would create a distinct identity for humankind. Along with this development, the spirit of community also grew stronger. Each fire pit was the center of a small group, where they together fought against the dark night and the cold. The strong hunted, the weak stayed by the fire, the old passed on experience, and the young learned from the group's failures and successes. This very cohesion prevented humankind from being crushed by a brutal nature. Yet, losses were unavoidable. Some groups vanished without a trace, perhaps buried in ice or simply unable to sustain their lineage. But in that harsh selection, the groups that were more creative, more united, and more resilient survived, and they, in some way, sowed the seeds for future generations, the humans who would gradually emerge from the Ice Age to build the first civilizations. The Ice Age was not just a cold period in Earth's history but also a life or death test for our ancestors. And their overcoming of that darkness proved one thing: intelligence and solidarity can be stronger than even the harshest nature. Fire and adaptation *** in the cold night of the Ice Age. One thing completely changed the fate of humankind: fire. If ice was the most formidable enemy, then fire was the most loyal ally. It not only warmed shivering bodies but also opened up a new horizon of life. Initially, our ancestors only knew how to keep fire. These flames originated from lightning strikes in forests or from embers left after large wildfires. They protected it like a treasure. A group of people guarded each small flame day and night, shielding it from the cold wind. Losing the fire meant the entire community falling into danger. No light, no warmth, and no weapon to ward off wild animals. Over time, humans gradually learned how to actively create fire by rubbing wood or striking stones to produce sparks. Although the initial techniques were clumsy, this was a great turning point. From being dependent on nature, humans began to control a part of nature's power. Fire not only kept them alive through long winters but also changed how they ate. Previously, Homo erectus ate many types of food raw. Raw meat was hard to chew and easily led to disease. And tough roots were indigestible. When they learned to cook, they not only enjoyed a more palatable taste but also absorbed more energy. This had a profound impact on brain development. The brain consumes a lot of energy, and fire provided the fuel for human intellect to advance further. Furthermore, fire also expanded their living space. In the darkness, the light from the fire pit allowed them to stay awake longer, converse, share stories, and transmit knowledge. Many researchers believe that these nights spent gathered around the fire were the cradle of early human culture, where legends, beliefs, and the seeds of language were formed. Undeniably, fire was the greatest survival tool of the Ice Age. It was what separated humans from all other species, transforming them from vulnerable creatures into beings capable of conquering a harsh environment. And it was thanks to fire that humans began to think further. Not just about surviving day by day, but about how to adapt long-term to this cold world. Fire not only brought warmth but also helped humans create new survival strategies. As the harsh climate gradually enveloped them, adaptive skills emerged, marking an important turning point in evolution. One of the most obvious changes was how humans crafted tools. The sharp stone fragments previously used only to cut meat or break bones were now meticulously honed to become spears, knives, and axes. Tools not only served for hunting but also helped process animal hides, chop wood, and build shelters, Having better tools meant humans could face larger and more dangerous prey that they previously had to avoid. In particular, they learned to use animal hides and fur to make rudimentary clothing. In frigid regions, just a layer of animal skin wrapped around the body could save a life from the biting wind. Perhaps for the first time in history, humans began to create a second skin, not through biological evolution but through creativity and ingenuity. This expanded their survival capabilities, allowing them to venture into lands previously uninhabitable. Additionally, fire allowed them to process and preserve food. Roasting meat extended its shelf life, while smoking could preserve its flavor longer. Although rudimentary, this laid the foundation for food storage habits, one of the crucial preparations for surviving harsh winters. Not stopping at material aspects, fire also opened up a new spiritual dimension. As the darkness of the Ice Age thickened, the light from the fire pit not only illuminated caves but also illuminated minds. Our ancestors began to have moments to temporarily step away from the struggle for survival to gaze at the fire and reflect. Perhaps it was during those winter nights that the first questions about the world arose. Why is it cold? Why does the sun disappear for so long? Where does fire come from? These unanswered questions sowed the seeds for abstract thought and rudimentary beliefs. Fire was not just a tool but also became a symbol, a gift from the heavens. A supernatural power that humans had to revere. In the dense darkness of the Ice Age, that flickering flame was a symbol of life, hope, and the ability to adapt. And from here, humankind entered a new phase, no longer merely reacting but actively creating to survive. As fire became an indispensable part of life. With fire becoming an indispensable part of life, primitive humans not only learned to survive but also began to transform themselves to adapt to the icy world. This was the time when their creativity and perseverance shone brighter than ever. One of the major advances was building more robust shelters. Previously, they often slept in caves or under tree canopies. Now, they knew how to use branches, animal bones, and hides to construct tents to shield themselves from the cold wind. These rudimentary structures, combined with fire, created the first homes in human history. Although simple, they symbolized a new concept, a home, where the entire community bonded and protected each other. Beyond shelter, humans also developed smarter hunting tactics. They learned to use terrain to drive animals off cliffs or set rudimentary traps to catch prey. These skills required coordination, planning, and trust among members. This was the beginning of strategic thinking, one of the capabilities that made humankind superior to all other species. Meanwhile, spiritual culture also gradually formed. Gatherings around the fire were not just for warmth but also for sharing stories, teaching skills, and perhaps even rudimentary beliefs. A crack on a cave wall might be seen as a sign from spirits. A strong flare of fire could be considered an omen. This imagination sowed the seeds for later beliefs and art. It is remarkable that all these changes did not happen in a day or a generation. They spanned thousands of years, through countless failures and sacrifices. But thanks to their perseverance, Homo erectus gradually overcame their limitations. They were no longer merely passive creatures before nature but actively modified nature to serve life. Fire, stone tools, animal skin clothing, shelters, all were testaments to their great adaptability. And it was in this harsh ice age that humankind developed an important trait, not just to survive, but always to strive to become stronger after each challenge. And then, as communities became more cohesive and intelligence further developed, humans began a new journey where instinct and solidarity became the key to overcoming the ice. The power of instinct and unity in that frigid world, where death always lurked, humans realized an important truth: a lone individual could hardly survive. But an entire community together could overcome any challenge. The Ice Age forced humankind to fully exploit the power of survival instinct and collective solidarity. Large hunts are the clearest evidence. A mammoth could feed an entire group for weeks, but bringing it down required perfect coordination. The agile would act as bait. The strong would prepare to throw spears. Others would block escape routes. All acted as a unified body. If even one link failed, the entire group could pay with their lives. In extreme danger, trust and coordination became assets more valuable than any tool. Not only in hunting, but unity also manifested in daily survival moments. When someone was injured, the community did not abandon them but cared for them, shared food, and protected them from wild animals. This mutual protection created the first human bond, something almost unseen in other animal species. From then on, the concept of us began to outweigh me. What is special is that the human survival instinct was not only directed toward the individual but also toward future generations. They taught their children how to make fire, how to recognize animal tracks, and how to craft tools. Each lesson not only helped the child survive but also maintained the collective memory of the entire group. This was the first seed of cultural inheritance, a factor that would make a fundamental difference between humankind and all other species. During long winter nights, when blizzards howled outside, the entire group huddled around the fire. They shared every piece of meat, passed animal fat among themselves for light, and told each other stories, perhaps about a recent hunt, perhaps about mysterious celestial signs. These moments not only kept them alive but also helped them nurture hope, an invisible but resilient spiritual strength. The Ice Age taught humans one thing: solidarity was not just a strategy but an evolved instinct. And it was thanks to this instinct that they began to form strong communities, the forerunners of human society. Later, solidarity not only helped humans fight against wild animals and the cold but also opened up an entirely new way of life, living for each other. During the Ice Age, when resources were scarce and the strong would conventionally survive while the weak perished, humans, conversely, chose to share. When a group hunted a large animal, they did not keep it for themselves but shared it with the entire community. Meat, hide, animal fat, all were distributed fairly. This act not only ensured that the entire group survived but also reinforced trust. Today I give, tomorrow I will receive. This was the rudimentary foundation of societal laws and ethics. In the journey of survival, the role of each individual also gradually became clear. The elderly, though no longer capable of hunting, were a treasure trove of experience. They knew where to find water, how to recognize weather signs, and tactics for dealing with wild animals. Children, though weak, were the hope for the future and were protected by the entire community. And the strong bore the responsibility of feeding the group. This natural division of labor created a rudimentary social structure where everyone had a role and was essential for the entire community's survival. Furthermore, the spirit of cooperation also paved the way for intellectual development. When hunting large animals, they had to discuss, plan, and even experiment with different strategies. Each hunt was a collective lesson, and every success or failure was remembered by the entire group. Intelligence, therefore, was no longer individual but became communal intelligence, one of humankind's most powerful evolutionary advantages. During the long, cold nights, solidarity had an even deeper meaning, maintaining morale. When one member despaired, the entire group became a pillar of support. When a child laughed, hope spread to everyone. In the ice, they warmed each other not just with fire but with emotional bonds. And that is why, among the many species that perished in the Ice Age, humans survived. If fire was the tool that helped humans fight nature, then solidarity was the tool that helped them overcome their own limitations. And from this, a vital principle was etched: to survive, no one can stand alone. As small communities became more cohesive, primitive humans began to form more complex social connections. Beyond simply hunting and sharing food, they also built trust, unwritten rules, and rudimentary rituals to strengthen solidarity. For example, before each hunt, the group might perform a symbolic action together, striking sticks on the ground, shouting war cries, or tossing embers into the air. Though simple, these rituals ignited collective spirit, helping them believe they were not alone when facing challenges. This was the nascent form of communal spiritual culture, which would later develop into ceremonies, beliefs, and religions. Within the community, communication also became increasingly important. Cries, sounds, and gestures were gradually replaced by more complex signal sequences. This allowed them to warn each other quickly, command during hunts, or express emotions. A glance, a call, a hand gesture, all became a common language helping the community bond. It can be said that solidarity fostered the evolution of language, and language, in turn, enhanced the power of solidarity. They were not only united in joy but also in loss and sorrow. When a member died, the community did not abandon them but might perform commemorative actions, rudimentary burials, covering the body with stones or earth, or even placing objects beside it. This shows that they not only thought about the present but also began to have an awareness of life and death. A great leap in human consciousness. In this ongoing process, a truth gradually emerged. It was community cohesion that became humankind's most potent weapon in the Ice Age. They lacked sharp fangs, superior speed, or physical strength like wild animals. But humans had the ability to live and fight as a unified whole. And that is why they not only survived but thrived after every challenge. The Ice Age, which seemed to bring only ice and extinction, in fact forged in humans a precious quality: knowing how to rely on each other to move forward together. This is the nucleus of all societies and civilizations that followed. The first traces of culture, having learned to use fire, craft tools, and live cohesively in communities. primitive humans began a new journey, creating the first cultural imprints of humankind. This was no longer just a struggle for survival but also a step forward to assert their distinctiveness from all other species. One of the most evident proofs is cave art. Crude drawings made with ochre, charcoal, or animal blood appeared on rock walls, depicting hunting scenes, migrating animal herds, or enigmatic symbols. To modern eyes, these might seem like mere scribbles, but to our ancestors, they could have been a way to preserve memories, transmit experiences, or even a form of spiritual ritual. Not stopping at drawings, humans also created the first symbols by carving marks on bones, stones, or tree bark. A carved line, a spiral shape, could carry many meanings, marking territory, remembering quantities, or symbolizing beliefs. This was an important step, laying the foundation for abstract thought and written language later on. Alongside this, rudimentary rituals also became increasingly apparent. When a person died, they were no longer left to nature but were carefully buried. Some archaeological sites show that ancient people also placed seashells, tools, or wildflowers on the graves. This demonstrates that they had begun to think beyond present life. They had beliefs about a world after death. It is astonishing that under the harsh conditions of the Ice Age, instead of focusing solely on survival, humans still dedicated time and energy to creativity and expression. This shows that they were not just creatures struggling against nature but also creatures that dreamt, felt, and yearned to leave a mark. Perhaps it was in those moments of gathering around the fire, telling stories of ancestors, drawing on cave walls, or burying a loved one that a new path opened, the path of human culture and spirit. One of the significant turning points in early culture was music and rhythm. Archaeology has uncovered flute fragments made from bird bones, tens of thousands of years old, showing that our ancestors knew how to play simple melodies. Perhaps by a brightly burning fire on a winter night, someone accidentally tapped two stones together, and then the whole group joined in the rhythm. This sound was not just for entertainment but became a spiritual bond that helped them overcome loneliness and fear. Music, drum beats, the sound of flutes, all opened a new dimension of culture, the sharing of emotions through sound. When the entire group harmonized, they were no longer just scattered individuals but became a unified community with a shared rhythm and belief. This was the nascent form of collective rituals, which would later develop into festivals and religions. At the same time, language became increasingly complex. Initially, it was just cries and growls, then sequences of sounds symbolizing objects and actions. As communities grew, they needed a more efficient communication system for coordination. Language, therefore, evolved rapidly, helping to convey hunting experiences, directions to water sources, or warnings of danger. But language was not just for survival, it also allowed humans to tell stories, share memories, and foster imagination. And then, that imagination led to belief in the supernatural. In the icy world, where scarce sunlight pierced thick clouds, where blizzards could sweep away an entire life, humans began to believe that invisible forces governed life. Fire might be a gift from the heavens, wild beasts might be messengers of the gods, and death was not an end but a door to another world. These beliefs helped them make sense of mysteries while also providing hope to continue living. Music, drum beats, the sound of flutes, all opened a new dimension of culture, the sharing of emotions through sound. When the entire group harmonized, they were no longer just scattered individuals but became a unified community with a shared rhythm and belief. This was the nascent form of collective rituals, which would later develop into festivals and religions. In the darkness of the Ice Age, when death could come at any moment, culture itself became a spiritual torch, illuminating the path for humans to step beyond instinct and toward a world of soul and intellect. When the first cultural imprints appeared, humans took a significant step out of the world of pure instinct. They began to create symbols to remember and connect, things that transcended daily survival needs. One of the clearest signs was jewelry and personal adornment. Archaeologists have found strings of beads made from seashells, small bones, and even animal teeth with drilled holes. These objects did not make them warmer or more full, but they carried symbolic value. Perhaps they were used to denote status, commemorate an event, or simply for adornment. It was the moment when humans decided to wear an object useless for survival that they affirmed themselves as beings capable of creating meaning. Not limited to material objects, the community spirit was also expressed through collective actions, rituals to honor ancestors, storytelling sessions passed down through generations, or songs sung around the campfire, all sowed the seeds for a collective memory. As a result, experiences were not just passed from father to son but were also preserved in the shared memory of the entire group. This was a form of humankind's first cultural treasury. What is special about this early culture is that art and belief were intertwined with survival. A drawing of an animal was not just for viewing but could be a way to summon the spirits of prey closer to the hunting grounds. A song was not just for entertainment but to boost their strength before venturing into danger. Culture at that time was not separate from life, it was an integral part of the survival strategy. Most importantly, the formation of culture created something unprecedented in any other species, a sense of self and their place in the world. When they drew on cave walls, when they buried their kin, when they wore seashell beads around their necks, they were telling themselves and the world that we not only exist, we have a story to tell. These imprints, however crude, laid the foundation for all of human history. For from the initial drawings to art, from the first strings of beads to jewelry, from small rituals to religion, everything began with the faltering steps of humans in the first ice age. And so, from the ashes of primitive fires, from the drawings on cold cave walls, human culture was born, a new fire that would never extinguish. 1 million years ago, when the first ice age engulfed Earth, primitive humans were just small, fragile beings before the might of nature. They had no sharp fangs like wild beasts, no thick fur to withstand the cold, nor the speed to easily escape. But they possessed a different kind of weapon, intellect, the instinct for unity, and the desire to leave a mark. It was these first steps, lighting fires in the dark, collectively bringing down mammoths, drawing figures on cave walls, burying loved ones with reverence, that opened the path for humans to escape the pure spiral of survival. From here, they not only survived but also began to build the foundations of civilization. The Ice Age, which seemed like a death sentence for life, actually became the greatest test, forging humans into who they are today. Without those harsh, cold days, perhaps there would be no cohesive communities, no language, no art, and no human culture as we inherit it. And looking back at that journey, we might ask ourselves, was it perhaps in hardship that humans found their true strength? Was it perhaps in the ice that the flame of intellect and spirit burned brightest? Today, we no longer face mammoths or deadly blizzards, but challenges still exist in many other forms. What our ancestors left behind reminds us that no matter the era, solidarity, intellect, and the aspiration to rise remain the keys for humanity to survive and thrive.